Good evening, team. TJ Banasik with Microsoft Sovereign Cloud Security. This evening's presentation is on the Azure Sentinel Zero Trust TIC 3.0 workbook demonstration. I'd like to thank Sean Conley and the CISSA agency for the fantastic work and presentation that they've put forward. And this presentation is going to talk about how we in the industry and Microsoft are approaching Zero Trust and TIC 3.0 use cases within federal information systems. First thing, let's talk about how we zero trust. So, do we want to do it? Absolutely. The answer is yes. There aren't many security professionals that are going to say that they're not aware of zero trust or don't feel that this is an effective model to get beyond. Zero trust, keep in mind, is not a compliance framework. It's a best practice maturity model. It's a revolutionary way of thinking in principles of how we verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach, how we change our model beyond the on-perimeter based model. John Kinderwack in the 2014 Forrester white paper described perimeter-based security as the M&M model, saying we would do everything that we possibly could to harden our perimeter like the shell of an M&M and keep our business on the inside, hoping that the threat wouldn't break that shell and get into the GUI center. We know in the cloud-based industry, things move so dynamically that Sean and team have put forward. Identity is the new control plan, the new network, the new central authority in how we manage these distributed cloud computing, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments. But how do we do it? We have high-level principles. At Microsoft, we centralize around these pillars and principles, and I'll show you guys in the demo how that looks. But how do we start to apply these high-level principles to technical approaches? If I'm a cloud security architect, how am I going to build a compliant cloud along the lines of zero trust principles and do it in the federal space with different models? A lot to think of. Which tools and offerings are we going to use to do that? If you've attended some of the recent security industry events, really now and in the past few years, zero trust is sweeping the industry. Every vendor will tell you that their tool is zero trust tech. You know, we use our solution. It's zero trust for identity and for network and for endpoint. And are they wrong? Like, no, they're not wrong. They're absolutely right. And that's one of the challenges in building these types of architectures is every different solution will have utility within a zero trust architecture. We need to change the way we think about how that architecture is put together. We may be using them differently, but we need to think about how to align them correctly in these approaches and these principles. I like to equate this to the example of someone on the battlefield. So if I'm on a battlefield and I'm engaging the enemy and I look down and there's a hammer, is that going to be helpful? Yeah, it might be helpful. Probably not the first thing that I would think of. I can't swing that thing like Thor, but yeah, I'll pick it up and give it a shot. Like everything that we have within our metaphorical zero trust toolkit is going to be helpful. So we need to think about maturing this model, aligning architectures to it within federal frameworks. How do we do this in the government space? Sean and team put forth a great presentation before this, touching on what some of these federal frameworks are and how we can use them in both zero trust, TIC 3.0, and CDM approaches. So the first Foundry document is NIST SP 800-207, which sets the foundation for zero trust architectures and gives us the approaches as we go forth. As we start to look at how do we apply technology and technical approaches, CDM and TIC 3.0 provide the model and foundation. Is it a hybrid in approaches? It can be at times between zero trust and TIC 3.0 and different models, and that's how we are looking to change our approach for zero trust and align that technology. That's what this workbook is seeking to do, to augment the work that we've done for the user community, make it easier to put these things together. So how do we know when we're there yet? Truly, it's a maturity model, something that we'll measure over time. But I'd like to talk about what the benefits of an Azure Sentinel workbook are when we bring this to bear. Azure Sentinel is our Microsoft cloud native security information event management platform. It does security orchestration, automation, and response. It centralizes your telemetry into a singular place, allowing you to develop use cases and architecture. So for a workbook like this, it provides a lot of different use cases, and really we're looking at the industry to tell us places where we can take this further, what works for your organizations and agencies, and definitely would love to hear the feedback and how that looks. I wouldn't say there's a primary use case, but I just wanted to highlight two or three that have shown utility. The first is for implementers. So if I'm looking to build and design a secure cloud and I want to look at which capabilities I can bring to bear, these types of workbooks would provide a foundation for planning, for looking at resources, evaluating capabilities, and then fitting them into zero trust type architectures. For security operations professionals, using a SIM for measuring maturity models is a rather new, I would say, revolutionary approach. So to think that we can come in once a year and do an annual audit and feel that that will be good enough within the cloud, that's something we need to break that mold and think about measuring maturity over time. Looking at compliance, more of a muscle that we need to work out and monitor and keep an eye on. So at any point to where we see that visibility, our SecOps teams can create alerts and automations to respond to that. For assessors, both internal and external, they have the ability to use this to measure the posture of a cloud. The great part about Azure Sentinel workbooks is you can deploy that from our gallery, lay this over your workload, regardless of what it is, and get instant insights on a well-rounded zero trust and even TIC 3.0 hybrid model. For managed security service providers or similar use cases, very large organizations that are monitoring sub-organizations, they can use this for consultants, for evaluation, for situational awareness, very universal and I would say wide in the different types of use cases. I even had a colleague of mine yesterday came up to me with a Surface Duo, which is one of our newer split screen mobile devices. And he said, "Hey, check it out. It's your workbook running on 5G. I'm like, that is awesome. I want to learn more about it. I was trying to get a picture in the deck, but maybe we'll follow on with the use case in the next one. The core of this offering is going to provide mappings of these frameworks to requirements and overlays into Microsoft technology, letting you know what we recommend within our best practice and how it aligns to the hybrid of these two models. The core of the offering is visualization, so keep in mind that this sits on top of your Azure and Microsoft workloads to provide visibility. There's hundreds of visualizations, recommendations, and queries built into this. This is not an end-all be-all solution. We would call this one of the tools in your kit in a zero trust or TIC 3.0 architecture. So definitely leaning more towards security operations, but something that you can couple with Azure Blueprints to lay out secure landing zones and policy and architectural guidance to really make life easier. So time savings and measuring maturity over time are some of the key win themes here. We're able to do aggregation and analysis, meaning you don't need to spend the time training your folks to get up to this level. You will have the pre-built queries when you see it. You'll be able to rapidly assess your capabilities and make those compliance grounded decisions or operational situational awareness type decisions. You'll be able to more effectively navigate through Azure and your Microsoft cloud. We currently have 13 different security portals, 50 plus Azure offerings that are covered within this workbook. So we want to make your life easier, tell you where to go and provide you a quick link to pivot right into the tool that we recommend, evaluate the capability, see corresponding documentation, and make configuration changes as need be. So a few frequently asked questions before we jump into the demo portion. I know there's a lot of questions that come up at this point. So what I've tried to do is bring those together into a singular place and say, all right, let's answer these right up on the bat, and then we'll go ahead and pivot into the demo-based portion of it. So is this type of a capability multi-tenant? The answer is absolutely yes. This is something that you can use in a multi-tenant or a cross-workspace environment. We have built in workbook parameters, which I'll show you, that help you integrate multiple subscriptions into a single place, meaning you can do an assessment of a single environment, of numerous environments, pull out custom reporting, bring in Azure Lighthouse if you're interested in multi-tenant based use cases, very flexible as far as what your requirements are. Next question, does it support a hybrid or an on-premise based model? Absolutely, yes, it does. We've already written our queries in to adjust and factor for this. If you have tooling that's aggregated into your Sentinel workspace, such as Azure Arc, which does multi-cloud management, Microsoft Defender for Identity, which does domain controller defense, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is our EDR endpoint-based solution, or the respective Microsoft monitoring agents, it will aggregate here. You will get visibility of those workloads. You will see a hybrid and an on-premise type approach. Government, will this work in government clouds? Common answer, yes, absolutely. This is currently in private preview. When we release to public preview next month, you will see that in all clouds. You will see that in commercial, in government, in other regions to support your requirements. Workbooks are very flexible, meaning once you deploy them within your workspace, you own the content. You can change it or adjust it as needed per the requirements of your organization. Can I print save? Great feedback from a previous effort that we have. I'm looking through the workbook and I want to provide this to my chief information security officer, my regulators, my customers, to give them a view of what their posture is. Absolutely, custom reporting, very granular in how you can do that, and I'll walk you guys through those components. Third-party tooling, multi-cloud, yes and yes, absolutely. If you have it in Azure, it is read writes over your workspace. You will not need to configure it. It will be there. If you want to take it further, you're like, hey, you're showing me a requirement to do anti-malware, and I'm seeing Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. I haven't done that. You know, I'm a federal agency. I've made a lot of investments. I want to use one of my other solutions. Fantastic. Edit the query, save it. You now have your third-party tooling integrated. A lot of places, when you go a tad bit wider for heartbeats and logs, you'll automatically see some of those things available. And if you want to tweak a custom use case, absolutely up to your team to do it. Very, very quick and expedient to make those changes happen. The way we organize this is crosswalking zero trust principles to TIC 3.0 security capabilities to look at the overlap. We then overlay Microsoft technologies that are most applicable within that space. There are, give or take, 50 different Microsoft security offerings included in this workbook at some place or another. So are you going to have them all? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. In most cases, it'll be a hybrid. You may have some of them and not others. So panels will be blank. They have custom error messaging. Is that a bad thing? Absolutely not. It's a great thing. A blank panel provides the opportunity to explore the control further. Do you have it covered? Do you need something in this gap? Maybe you have it, but it's not onboarded. Maybe the log source isn't reporting. It's driving those discussions for situational awareness. So blank panels are absolutely an opportunity to explore further. Last question. Okay, I don't require TIC 3.0 compliance. You know, maybe I'm not a federal government customer. I may be in another industry. Will this still be helpful for me? Absolutely, it will be. We've seen great feedback as far as how these work. Each one of the capability cards will include a crosswalk to other compliance frameworks. A lot of the fantastic work out of the TIC office is showing how to TIC frameworks map to the NIST cybersecurity framework and respective controls. So really everyone can gain this visibility within their environment. And if you're using a different framework, you can evaluate what that overlap looks like. So now we'll go ahead and pivot over into our demo environment. This is the Zero Trust TIC 3.0 workbook. The first thing that I'll do when coming in, notice that I have a guide panel right here. This is a GUI to help me navigate the workbook, and you see this right here. This covers a lot of what we've talked about in the presentation. What is Zero Trust? How does Microsoft define the model? What is Trusted Internet Connections 3.0? You know, and Sean Conley and the CISSA team did a fantastic job talking about what that framework is. Burning question, is Zero Trust equivalent to TIC 3.0? Absolutely not. Zero Trust is a best practice model. Zero Trust is a security initiative. Where Zero Trust is wide, TIC is narrow. The overlap of that with Microsoft technology and offerings provides a granular hybrid that we can build cloud security architectures to. The legend is a color coding for each one of these panels to help you navigate this workbook. So if it's green like this panel, it's going to be a definition or a guide. If it's blue, it's going to show customer responsibility, mappings of controls, how they overlap. Red is calling gaps. So if there's an area that is a customer responsibility, there's 2 or 3 areas within there, we want to ensure that we call that out to let you know that there's a responsibility for you to potentially meet a controller requirement in that space. Anytime that we use a log source or telemetry, there'll be a blue diamond. We want to tell you which tool is providing that, what we're looking at in telemetry. If you don't have that tool, we'll provide a reference with these little green icons to the product page. So if you want to evaluate a capability, know what a tool is capable of, you have that ability there. If we make a recommendation to look at a configuration or use a tool in a certain way, we will have this blue icon that will pivot you directly into that portal, into that tool, into that blade. So you don't have to take the time figuring out, hey, how are these 50 or so different offerings organized? I'll just click on it, follow the recommendation, and save me a lot of time. The light bulb is referenced, and we've had customers give us great feedback to say, Microsoft, you guys have fantastic documentation. The challenge is it's enormous, and we can get lost in there. If I'm looking for a requirement, I may see a lot of similar things and not know if I'm really getting to the key of what I'm looking for. So what we've done is for every recommendation, we'll provide the applicable reference within our documentation to pivot down into it and save you the time of looking for it. Docs are frequently updated, so very likely you'll get very fresh and very current information around those use cases. We do have disclaimers within here. The key is we do not guarantee nor imply compliance with these types of workbooks. These should be considered a planning tool, refer to respective authorities on frameworks and how to build. And as always, trust your internal and external regulators in how you approach cloud security. So once we get to the point to where we've seen this, it's great for the first time, but we're going to go ahead and abstract it away, get down to the core of the workload and help us navigate it a tad bit better. So here we have our parameter-based functions. Now this is where we start to customize things. If I have multiple subscriptions, I can select all, some, or none of those to see the posture of these different workloads. If I've got numerous sub-organizations in different workspaces, exactly the same, I'm able to customize configurations of how I look at that. Time range is something in similar efforts that we've done in the past, like the Azure Sentinel CMMC workbook. We took a few liberties showing how the data would best visualize, and feedback from the community is, I've got different requirements and different use cases. Give me the ability to look at it in a 24-hour time period for my security operations centers, or I want to check that 90-day maturity model over time, or maybe even kick out a custom report within a time frame that I feel is most appropriate in what I need to see. So we'll go ahead and drop that back down to 90 days. We'll now go into the TIC capabilities. So we have our different capability families. You can see an overview talking about what this model is, universal security capabilities, files, email, web, networking, resiliency, DNS, intrusion detection, enterprise, UCC, and data protection. So very wide swath. Do you have to use these capabilities for every workload? No, it's going to be on you to decide how to follow TIC 3.0 guidance in laying these out, but at least you can see the capabilities that you would bring to bear for securing these workloads. I want to start with the overview section, and what you'll notice is when I start to click these, the panels below change, and what that means is really now I have 13 or so sub workbooks that align to that. If I like what I'm seeing here, I'm able to create a custom report based on all of it, some of it, none of it, time range, subscription range. Once I'm happy with it, print the content, save a PDF, hand that to my CISO, my CIO, my regulators, whoever could benefit this in basically a slick PDF in a presentable format. When we go into the overview, we'll spend some time in there and look at some of the different things. So Zero Trust architecture, this is how we align our different architectures around pillars of identity, devices, data, applications, infrastructure, and network. We have different principles, win themes, areas that you can go to the Zero Trust Deployment Center when planning and deploying these architectures, automation to save you some time, our Zero Trust thought leadership in the space and different resources. Learning more about Trusted Internet Connections 3.0 into a TIC guidance as far as what are these core documents, you know, to save you the time in looking around and putting this together in one place. If you want to know which Microsoft security offerings are included in here, that's been great feedback that we've had. We have an index of all 50 of these offerings. We say how many times they're used across this, which percentage of coverage is there, and you'll see a strong story for offerings like Azure Security Center, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, AAD, Azure Sentinel, Azure Firewall, and so on and so forth. As we go down the portfolio, each one of these will provide a pivot. So you're like, wow, Azure Security Center has a lot of capability in here. I'm new to that tool. Can pivot directly into the product page to look at the product overview, its features, its pricing, and documentation, just to save me the time of having to go and look for it. We also have a smart card down here, 13 different portals and how you would access this. Even I need to use smart cards and moving around. So if I give you a recommendation to go somewhere, it'd be nice to be able to pivot directly into that. And that's what you'll see with all of these. This is really just an index of things that we're using and pointers to these different features. So let's go ahead and drop off the overview, go into universal security capabilities, and you see that the pivot below changed. These are all the different things that I can look at within this control family. Down here, and I think we're losing it a tad bit, just a quick navigation. And the nice thing is, any of these you select, we're going to pivot directly to it. So this is the core of the offering. You'll see a requirement. This one is inventory. The TIC guidance in how you go about doing inventory. Microsoft recommendations, we have several of them. And the key is we wanted to put as many things as we could in this overlay because they're wide approaches. You would do inventory in a lot of different ways. Anything that we can bring to bear in a Microsoft workload to help you with inventory, you'll have the recommendations there. We're using telemetry to visualize this like you see in this panel on the right. So anytime we use a solution, we'll tell you what it is, and you have the link to the product page to look further. We'll tell you what the solution is. This one is log analytics, and I'm looking at the heartbeat table to provide different calls within here. I'm also using Azure Resource Graph to see what these assets are. We'll let you know to navigate to different places within Azure and your Microsoft workloads. Here's a great example of the pivot, Azure Security Center. I'm like, okay, well, you're telling me use Security Center for inventory. How do I get there? Let's go ahead and click on the link. We will get a quick authentication, and we immediately pivot into our Security Center. So we don't need to look for it. There's the posture of that tool. If there's a recommendation to go into here for inventory, like we just saw, we're able to pivot directly down into that blade without doing much digging for it. Down below, we've got the Microsoft documentation and references. So you showed me that I can use Azure Security Center to do inventory. What if I want to know a little bit more about how to use that tool? Fantastic. Let's go right into your documentation and look how to explore and manage your assets. So saving you the time of reading through the docs. If you want to learn more about the TIC model, fantastic. We'll pivot over to CISA to talk about how that model is, provide the program documentation, and so on and so forth. If you happen to not be using this framework and you've got something else at play, NIST cybersecurity mappings in how you can get there. So over here, just a quick look at some of these panels. This is calling the telemetry, getting an inventory. Did I know that I have automation accounts that are different assets? Like, wow, that's really granular. I have websites that I'm inventorying, server farms, databases. Each one of these, I click on it, I'm in the asset. I know what it is, where it is, which resource groups. If I happen to want to export that as an artifact, I can do that. If I want to dive into the telemetry, a lot of folks that have been auditors or regulators in a former life like myself would say, it looks great, but it's pretty pictures. I want to see raw telemetry. You can do that there. If you happen to be using another resource, you can adjust that query and bring in your third party or your multi-cloud tooling. This is showing us an asset count by type. So you're like, wow, I saw a lot of this stuff. What are we seeing? I'm seeing workbooks, compute-based resources, virtual machines, API connectors, network-based infrastructure. All of this is bound to the parameters that we saw above. So this is customized to a workload, drilled down into a workspace, and it's responding to my time-bound parameter of 90 days. What if I want to know where it is? Like, we're getting the 5 Ws now. I've got Central US, 46% of my workloads are in there, East US, tad bit of global, some Canada in there as well. Fantastic. How many do I have? 612 assets within this workspace. Where am I centralizing my logging? A lot of different places we have with this visibility. Okay, how many virtual machines do I have? This is an inventory of each virtual machine, computer IP, operating system type, how it is synchronized. Is it a cloud, an IaaS, a hybrid, a multi-cloud type asset? Where is it organized? If I want to pivot, I can click directly into each one of these assets. These are my hybrid joined assets, meaning we're using Azure Arc to look outside of Azure and manage those machines. Down below, you'll notice that we start to get outside of query. So query can show you a lot of great stuff in logging and in our resource graph and API calls. Some things are actually better showed with a diagram or a picture or a reference. So here we're showing Azure Defender to look at network mapping for your assets to understand which assets can talk to help you say, hey, asset A can talk to asset B, but maybe not asset C. Fantastic. Or use Azure Automation to do software-based inventories and integrate with Microsoft Defender for endpoint to get better visibility into the software and work on your configuration management and asset inventory. Or integrate with Windows Virtual Desktop. Look at the endpoint machines that you have within your workload. We're close on time now, so I'll just pivot down into one more workload. Keep in mind that this framework has approximately 76 controls, very wide in what we see and what we look at over time. This one is least privileged, so I'm starting to see an identity-based story around an action count of role over time. So I've got some owners, some contributors, some readers. This is the real power of looking at this over time. There's a much different story in the beginning of February than we have right here in March 13th. And March 13th, I've got a complete shutdown of my system. Is that a failure? Is that a security issue? I don't know, but it's certainly a pattern I'd want visibility on to be able to jump into there and respond. You'll see the majority of our visualizations for our sources are like that. So if I show you malware, I'm going to show you 8, 10 different Microsoft security tools detecting malware, and you'll start to see the fusion. When I see 4 or 5 different tools spiking at the same point, that's letting me know I'm being attacked. I need to respond. If I'm seeing Security Center call out recommendations in SecureSOAR, it lets me know I'm vulnerable. If I want to create an alert to say, tell me when a vulnerable asset is being attacked, I can do that as well. So that is really it in the core of the offering. I'm going to go ahead and pivot up to the top and go back to our slide deck. And I believe we are going to roll on in the presentation and provide some time for questions here at the end. So call to action today is get started with a free trial for Azure Sentinel, either in the commercial environment or the government space. When you pull up Sentinel, go into our workbooks gallery, look at the Zero Trust TIC 3.0 workbook. You will see that in public preview released next month. Look at our CMMC workbook and similar efforts. Save you the time and the resources to effectively go about building these models and gain very deep integrated platform level visibility of your workloads.